I was sitting on my couch, engrossed in a horror movie, when suddenly the doorbell rang. I jumped, startled by the unexpected sound. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Who could it be at this hour? I hesitated, unsure of whether I should answer the door. My heart raced as I got up from the couch and made my way to the front door. As I approached, I could hear heavy breathing on the other side. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Slowly, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. There, standing on my doorstep, was a figure dressed in a dark cloak, their face obscured by shadows. My blood ran cold as I realized that I didn't recognize the person. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure stepped forward, closer to me. I could feel their breath on my face, and it smelled of decay. Suddenly, the figure lunged at me, its bony hands grasping at my throat. I fought back, struggling to free myself from its grip. But it was too strong. As the darkness closed in around me, I realized that I was going to die. The next morning, the police arrived at my doorstep. They had received reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood and were investigating. As they entered my home, they found my lifeless body lying on the floor, my eyes staring blankly ahead. They never found the person responsible for my death, but some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of heavy breathing and the ringing of a doorbell in the distance. Rumors began to spread throughout the neighborhood about the mysterious figure in the dark cloak that had been seen lurking around. Some claimed to have seen the figure ringing doorbells in the dead of night, while others reported hearing strange noises coming from their attics. People became increasingly paranoid, locking their doors and windows at all times, and avoiding going out after dark. But no one seemed to know who or what was behind the terrifying events. Despite the police conducting thorough investigations and questioning numerous suspects, the case remained unsolved. Months went by without any new developments, and it seemed like the mystery would never be solved. But then, one stormy night, a group of teenagers decided to play a game of ding-dong-ditch in the neighborhood. They laughed and joked as they rang doorbells and ran away, but their fun was short-lived when they rang the bell of an old abandoned house at the end of the street. As they turned to run, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from inside the house. Terrified, they ran as fast as they could back to their homes, but the image of the dark figure standing in the doorway of the abandoned house was burned into their minds. The next day, the police arrived at the abandoned house, and what they found inside was horrifying. The walls were covered in strange symbols and markings, and there were piles of bones scattered throughout the rooms. In the center of the house, they found a ritual circle with a decaying corpse lying in the middle. It was clear that whoever was responsible for the string of murders in the neighborhood had been using this house as their base of operations. The police were never able to identify the person responsible for the murders, and the case remains unsolved to this day. But people in the neighborhood still remember the terror that swept through their community, and many believe that the dark figure in the cloak still haunts the streets at night, searching for their next victim. After the discovery of the abandoned house, the town was thrown into chaos. People were afraid to leave their homes at night, and rumors spread about the supposed cult that had been operating in the area. As the weeks went by, the paranoia only grew worse. Some people reported seeing the dark figure in the cloak lurking in the shadows, while others claimed to have heard strange chanting coming from the woods. The police, meanwhile, were at a loss as to how to solve the case. They had no leads and no suspects, and the killer continued to elude them. But then, one night, a young woman was walking home from a late shift at work when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, and she quickened her pace, convinced that someone was following her. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand grab her shoulder. She spun around, but there was no one there. The hand tightened its grip, and she felt a chill run down her spine. As she tried to break free, the figure in the cloak emerged from the shadows. It was the same figure that had killed the previous victims, and now it had set its sights on her. The woman tried to scream, but the figure covered her mouth with its hand. It dragged her into the woods, and she knew that she was never going to make it out alive. The next morning, the police found her body, mutilated beyond recognition. They searched the woods for any sign of the killer, but they found nothing. And so the cycle of terror continued, with the dark figure in the cloak claiming victim after victim. No one knew who or what was behind the killings, but they knew that they had to be vigilant if they wanted to survive. To this day, people in the town still speak in hushed tones about the murders that haunted their community. And though the killer was never caught, many believe that the dark figure in the cloak still roams the woods, waiting for its next victim. Despite the string of murders that had occurred in the town, life eventually returned to some semblance of normalcy. People went about their business during the day, but at night, they locked their doors and windows, fearing the return of the dark figure in the cloak. However, the peace was short-lived. One night, a young couple was driving home from a movie when their car broke down on a deserted road. As they got out of the car to check the engine, they heard a faint ringing sound in the distance. At first, they thought it was their imagination, but as they listened more closely, the sound grew louder. It was the sound of a doorbell ringing. The couple was unnerved, and they quickly got back in the car. But before they could drive away, they saw the dark figure in the cloak standing in the middle of the road, its eyes fixed on them. The couple tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. The figure began to walk toward them, and they could hear its heavy breathing growing louder with each step. With no other options, the couple got out of the car and ran in opposite directions. The figure chased after them, but they managed to outrun it and eventually found refuge in a nearby house. But the relief was short-lived. As they looked out the window, they saw the dark figure in the cloak standing outside, staring at them with cold, empty eyes. As the night wore on, the couple heard strange noises coming from the attic. It sounded like chanting, and it sent shivers down their spines. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, they decided to investigate. As they climbed the stairs to the attic, they saw the symbols and markings that covered the walls, just like in the abandoned house. Suddenly, they heard footsteps behind them. They turned around, and there was the dark figure in the cloak, its arms outstretched and its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The couple tried to run, but it was too late. The figure caught them, and they were never seen again. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young couple, but people in the town still speak in whispers about the dark figure in the cloak that haunts their streets at night. And with each passing day, the fear only grows stronger, for they know that the figure could strike at any moment. The people of the town were on edge. The murders had continued, and each night, the dark figure in the cloak seemed to grow bolder. People had stopped leaving their homes after dark, and the streets were deserted by sunset. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned house where the cult had supposedly operated. They thought it would be fun to investigate the spooky rumors that had been circulating around town. As they approached the house, they heard the sound of a doorbell ringing. They froze, unsure of what to do. They knew that no one had lived in the house for years, but the sound was unmistakable. They hesitated for a moment, but their curiosity got the best of them. They cautiously opened the door, and the ringing stopped. Inside, the house was dark and musty. The teenagers split up to search for clues, but as they explored the rooms, they felt like they were being watched. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. They froze, unsure of what to do. They listened closely, and heard the faint sound of chanting coming from upstairs. The teenagers slowly made their way up the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they reached the top, they saw the symbols and markings that covered the walls, just like the previous victims had reported. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a door creaking open. They turned around, and there was the dark figure in the cloak, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The teenagers tried to run, but it was too late. The figure was too fast, and it caught them one by one. They screamed for help, but no one came. The next day, the police found the bodies of the teenagers, mutilated beyond recognition. The townspeople were terrified, knowing that the dark figure in the cloak was still out there, somewhere. From that day forward, the town was forever changed. People no longer talked about the murders in hushed whispers, but openly discussed the terror that had gripped their community. And though the killer was never caught, many believed that the dark figure in the cloak still roamed the town, waiting for its next victim. The sound of a doorbell ringing became a constant reminder of the horror that had descended upon their once peaceful community, and the people lived in fear of what lurked in the shadows. As time went on, the town became a shadow of its former self. The streets were empty, shops and businesses closed down, and people lived in a constant state of fear. Everyone knew that the dark figure in the cloak was still out there, waiting for its next victim. One day, a new family moved into town. They were unaware of the horrors that had taken place, and they were excited to start a new life in a small, tight-knit community. As they settled into their new home, they noticed strange markings on the walls and doors. They assumed it was just an old, run-down house and didn't think much of it. But as the sun set on their first night in the town, they heard a faint ringing sound in the distance. At first, they thought it was just their imagination. But the ringing grew louder and louder, until it was impossible to ignore. It was the sound of a doorbell ringing. The family was frightened, but they didn't know what to do. They locked their doors and windows and waited for the ringing to stop. But it didn't. As the night wore on, the ringing grew more and more persistent. It was as if the dark figure in the cloak was trying to lure them outside. Finally, unable to take it anymore, the father of the family decided to investigate. He cautiously opened the door, and there was the dark figure in the cloak, standing on their doorstep. The father tried to slam the door shut, but the figure was too strong. It pushed its way into the house and began to chase after the family. The family ran for their lives, but it was no use. The dark figure in the cloak was too fast, too strong, too unstoppable. One by one, the family members were caught, never to be seen again. And as the sun rose on the town the next day, the ringing of the doorbell still echoed in the empty streets. The dark figure in the cloak had claimed yet another victim, and the terror of the town only grew stronger. No one knows what happened to the family that had moved in, but the people of the town knew that the dark figure in the cloak was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And as they locked their doors and windows at night, they knew that they could never truly escape the horror that had descended upon their once peaceful community. The town had become a ghost town, deserted and barren. The only sounds were the occasional ringing of a doorbell and the footsteps of the dark figure in the cloak. People had stopped trying to catch the killer, as they had lost all hope of stopping its relentless pursuit of victims. But one day, a group of brave individuals decided to take matters into their own hands. They knew the risks, but they couldn't just stand by and watch as their town was destroyed by the dark figure. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, they set out to find the killer's lair. They searched the abandoned house, the woods, and even the underground tunnels beneath the town. As they searched, they heard the sound of a doorbell ringing. But this time, it wasn't coming from any house or building. It was coming from the killer itself. The group followed the sound, and it led them to a secret room deep beneath the town. In the room, they found the dark figure in the cloak, standing over a pile of bodies. But this time, the group was ready. They charged at the killer, and a fierce battle ensued. The killer fought back with all its might, but the group was determined to end the terror that had plagued their town for so long. Finally, after what felt like hours, the killer fell to the ground, defeated. The group had succeeded in their mission, and the town could finally start to heal. As the sun rose on the town, the people emerged from their homes, blinking in the light of day. They looked around, amazed that their town was finally safe again. The group of heroes had saved their town from the terror of the dark figure in the cloak. And though the town would never forget the horrors that had taken place, they could finally move on and start to rebuild. As for the killer, no one knew where it came from or what drove it to kill. But the people of the town knew that they had to keep a watchful eye, just in case the darkness ever returned. The town slowly started to recover from the horrors that had plagued it for so long. People began to move back, businesses reopened, and life started to return to some sense of normalcy. But something was off. People started to report strange occurrences, things moving on their own, doors opening and closing without explanation, and the faint sound of a doorbell ringing in the distance. At first, people dismissed it as their imagination. They thought that they were still recovering from the trauma of the dark figure in the cloak. But as time went on, the occurrences became more frequent, and the fear in the town grew once again. One day, a group of curious teenagers decided to investigate. They went to the abandoned house where the dark figure in the cloak had once resided, hoping to find some answers. As they searched the house, they stumbled upon a hidden room, deep in the basement. In the room, they found a diary, written by the previous owner of the house. The diary revealed a shocking truth: the previous owner was the dark figure in the cloak. They had been driven to madness by the town's constant rejection, and they had taken on the persona of the dark figure in order to seek revenge. But that wasn't the only twist. As the group left the house, they saw a figure in a cloak, standing on the street corner. It was someone that they recognized, one of the people who had helped defeat the dark figure in the cloak. But as they got closer, they realized that it wasn't a person at all, it was the dark figure in the cloak, back from the dead. The group ran for their lives, knowing that they had to warn the town. But it was too late. The dark figure had returned, and this time, it wasn't just seeking revenge on the people who had rejected it, it was seeking revenge on the entire town. And so, the terror of the dark figure in the cloak continued, with the people of the town once again living in fear of the ringing of a doorbell, and the footsteps of the relentless killer. The double plot twist had left the town in shock, as they thought they had finally defeated the dark figure in the cloak. But they knew that they had to band together once again, to face this new threat, and to try and finally put an end to the terror that had plagued their town for far too long. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more great content. Your support helps us continue to create and share valuable information with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.